Hackers attack systems that are not patched. You need protection, but virtual patching isn't working. That's why you go patchless. Topia analyzes, prioritizes, and remediates vulnerabilities before they're exploited. Even the 0 days, all from one interface. Security gets better memory defense to complement endpoint strategy while improving overall vulnerability management and compliance. Adopt a hacker's mindset, eliminate vulnerability. Get your 30-day free trial at securityweekly.com/vicarious. NetSparker, the developers of a comprehensive automated web security platform that includes web vulnerability scanning, assessment, and management. NetSparker's desktop and cloud-based security solutions employ a unique and dead-accurate vulnerability scanning engine that automatically verifies vulnerabilities and provides a proof of concept. For more information, visit them on the web at securityweekly.com/NetSparker. The average large enterprise has 24 million vulnerabilities. The good news is only 5% will probably be exploited. But which 5%? That's where Kenna comes in. Kenna Security's modern vulnerability management technology combines real-time threat intelligence, data science, and automated risk analysis to prioritize the vulnerabilities that pose the biggest threat to your organization. Team up with Kenna Security and make the most of your limited resources. Learn more at securityweekly.com/Kenna Security. Welcome back, everyone, to Paul's Security Weekly. It's official. Security Weekly, in partnership with the Cyber Risk Alliance, is excited to present Security Weekly Unlocked on December 10th, 2020. It is the inaugural edition of Security Weekly Unlocked, also celebrating our 15th anniversary. The CFP closes tonight at midnight, so make sure you get your submissions in and or register for the conference by visiting securityweekly.com/unlocked. Patrick Garrity has years of experience in the security industry, building and scaling usable security products. He currently leads Blue Mira's product sales and marketing teams. Prior to joining Blue Mira, he led sales, engineering, product marketing, and international expansion for Duo Security. Patrick, welcome to the show.
What's up? It's great to be on.
Nice to have you. Thanks for letting
me join. And I hope you enjoyed my Halloween costume.
It's very nice. It's very nice. Very anonymous.
Getting ready for October 31st.
Very nice. Patrick, how did you get your start in information security?
Yeah, it's interesting. I literally met up with Doug Song at a meetup. I was in IT. And if anybody knows Doug Song, founder of Duo. And at the time, I'm like, hey, I think I can help you out. Help build the organization out. And he's like, yeah, I don't know. So more or less, I brought a few customers to him and said, hey, they're interested in your product. They need to solve for two-factor. And the rest is history. Doug brought me on board and spent 8 years building Duo. So that's the majority of it. Before that, I did some managed service providers and things of that nature where there was some hands-on security at the time, but not to the extent of what Duo was.
Patrick, your topic is fascinating. I want you to set it up for us. Democratizing and Saasifying security operations. Unpack that for us.
Yeah. I think a few different things, right? First off is security for most organizations is pretty complex, right? Trying to figure out what problems to tackle, what products to apply towards what problems, and what people to apply. And the reality is at least being at the forefront of customers with incidences and helping out with response, most of them struggle to even get some of the most basic controls in place. And we're not just talking about small businesses, right? This is even medium-sized or large businesses. And so, yeah, when we say democratizing or saasifying, it's truly bringing the product down to a point where a small, medium-sized, or even individual person can leverage a tool that's highly effective. And truly, I always get emotional, but being a part of Duo and doing that, I think Duo was really one of the first products that was able to deliver in a matter of minutes and provide high value to customers in the security space. So that's what I mean, if that's helpful.
Patrick, how do you define the basics, right? Like is MFA part of the basics? And like I think still to this day struggle to provide clear guidance as to what is the bare minimum, the basics when it comes to information security.
I think it is an interesting thing. So I think MFA is definitely a basic that a lot of people still don't even have in place. Credential compromise is like one of the top places we see from a threat perspective. I think earlier I was watching, but making sure, anything exposed externally is patched and up to date. Obviously is a priority. Internal as well can be important too. Making sure ports aren't wide open. Literally, I see it all day long. And you can kind of see this too from a visibility perspective with products like Census. There's a lot of stuff on the internet that's wide open and accessible.
Yeah, I agree, Patrick. Reducing, I think, is a great first, place to start, right? Reducing your attack surface, right? Hardening almost your environment and systems is super important. I am still amazed to this day how many organizations don't do that. If you look at they were talking about it on Application Security Weekly this week. Apple paid out that $300,000 in bug bounties. And the first thing that they did as part of the bug bounty program was they enumerated everything on Apple's public Class A subnet. And why wasn't Apple doing that before the bug bounty? This is Apple we're talking about, right? Now we get to larger enterprises all the way down to small businesses. This is, I think, a basic thing that so many organizations miss today.
Yeah, I think as well, most of the products, even in the security space, don't apply this strong security principles. So even if you deploy MFA, did you deploy it on all the things that require user login? And so a lot of times people have a false sense of security as well, as far as where a security control is actually applied. And I think that goes to show across the board, right? Definitely you need a MFA or two-factor product. Someone mentioned that words are pretty much interchangeable. Having endpoint detection is a common control. Having a firewall in place, but why do firewalls let people by default open any ports so everything's accessible? Maybe there needs to be a little bit more design from a control perspective so that kind of stuff doesn't happen. But I think a lot of times some of the reason behind that is because people focus more on broad feature sets that let you do anything than being inherently secure by design.
Now, what's interesting, Jeff, is many of the things that Patrick and I are talking about are in the PCI DSS standard.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely.
Really? They are?
I think...
The attack surface management isn't specifically called out, Jeff, but you do have to have a scan, and they will find open ports, right? And you will have to your, I think, earlier point, fix the vulnerabilities in there. And sometimes, as I think you and I have experienced, with the shop next door, sometimes just removing those services is even better. I don't think PCI really makes a difference between removing the service and or patching it, right, from a compliance perspective. But from a practice perspective, I'll defer to you for the expert on that.
Since you brought it up, PCI, if done correctly, does a lot of the stuff that you're talking about and takes care of it before you ever get to the scan. The scan in PCI really is by design meant to be a safety net to detect the things that, for whatever reason get overlooked. It's never was intended to be the beginning of, let's say, a vulnerability management program.
Right.
Well, let's just twiddle our thumbs and just sit around and run a vulnerability scan. We've got missing patches. We're on old services. We've got misconfigurations. No, all that's supposed to be taken care of ahead of time.
But also, PCI is specific to the PCI environment, and I think what Patrick and I are talking about is this is a starting place. You mentioned MFA, Patrick, right? Not just having MFA on your systems that would be in scope for a PCI audit, but MFA on everything, right, is super important.
Yeah, and I think a lot of times as we talk about compliance, people put the controls where they're absolutely necessary, and then they neglect to apply them anywhere else, whether it's cost or resources, right, is very common. So, they're making a risk decision based on money and time. A lot of times in those regards too. So yeah, you're right. A lot of times if it's not in scope, I don't care. And compliance becomes more of a checkbox program than an actual security program as well.
Yeah, that's certainly certainly we've talked about that on previous episodes quite a bit, actually. But you also mentioned the one aspect that I like about a solution, and this doesn't have to be a commercial solution, but it's that time to deployment, I guess I should call it, right? And Duo's been very good at this. I mean, they're not a sponsor, but I will endorse them in specifically this aspect as well, in that you should apply the same level of scrutiny to all of your solutions, right? Whether those are process, whether there's some kind of product, whether it's open source or free or what have you, right? The time from you go, we have this problem, this is the solution, to the solution being implemented, right, needs to be as short as possible, because complexity will kill you on this front when you're trying to implement a security program or really any other kind of program.
Yeah. So you said time to value, which is one way to say it. The other thing, a good term to use is time to security, right? Like, how quick do I actually get to security value? Because sometimes deploying things doesn't mean that they're secure as well. But that time to security where you're getting something in place and then you're essentially getting value and it's helping you from a security program perspective is key. And I think it's becoming more and more that if a product can't get deployed and implemented in a matter of a couple of hours, it loses value a lot of times because people don't have the resources to sit around trying to figure out how to tinker and deploy. Is what I would say there. And you look at some of the next gen security products, that's essentially what they are, is, they're focused on the Saasifying or democratizing. So essentially you can get to deployment down to a couple of hours or a couple of minutes in even some instances, right?
But if you can do that, Patrick, how do you know when you're secure? How do you know it? And that's kind of just a funny way of saying, like, how do you measure the effectiveness of it, right? Because I feel like, a little background there, right? I feel like even really great security teams, organizations that are mature on the security maturity curve, however you want to say that, can be a misconception because they're not measuring the right things. I think a truly secure, mature security program has that measurement component, and they're actually measuring things that matter to gauge the effectiveness of their tools. And I make that sound like it's easy, but it's not.
Well, it's just the output from your vulnerability scan.
Yeah, less vulnerabilities is good, right? I couldn't even say that with a straight face.
This is really interesting because this week, like in the last couple of weeks, we started publishing detection tests. And there's kind of two different intentions. And if you get, some of these are on our website, I can share in a sec here. And it's kind of interesting you mentioned this because we haven't talked about this, but yeah, even with our own product, we encourage people to test to make sure they can detect things. Like, you shouldn't wait for a pen test, your annual pen test, to see if you can detect common attacks. And then there's an intrinsic other value of like, oh, go test your SIM right now and see if it actually works. Because what we find is about 75% of deployments can't even detect the most basic attacks, right? Is the reality, right? So doing things as a minimal of even like PowerShell execution bypass, or policy bypass, password spraying, testing honeypots, that sort of stuff. Like, you should, as a security program, regularly be thinking about that, even if it's on a monthly basis, right? To make sure that you have the right controls in place. And then certainly also having something to do detection, for example, of real threats, misconfigurations, that sort of stuff becomes pretty important as well.
I think there's a big difference between controls in place versus controls actually working.
Yes. Yep. Yeah. And even I remember at Duo, we had a deal where the CEO wouldn't buy our product unless we had a bypass code because he didn't want to have to use two-factor, right?
Right.
And that's
there's a control in place, but there's some exceptions, right? And then is it really working, right? Yeah.
And that's essentially how that feature got developed, right? That wasn't the security team or product, but it was like, to win this deal, we need to make a bypass, right? So I think also a lot of times security can erode in products for, in some ways good intention and bad intention as well. And so, I think in some regards, like, we're seeing that a little bit with like VPN right now. For instance, in some of the displacement or replacement of those products is a really good example.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't need to require a VPN. I'll just expose the web app to the internet, right?
Sure.
Oh, it gets better than that. I mean, like just a few weeks ago, I was on a call and the person told me, yeah, the compliance framework said we couldn't use a VPN, so we just put RDP online, right?
Well,
What the hell?
What compliance framework says not to use a VPN?
Yeah, but so that's an example where compliance gets misinterpreted, right?
Yeah, right. I see.
Yeah, and IT people don't realize it's not secure to expose RDP. And I'm sure there's some people shocked to hear that, right? But interacting with thousands of customers on a yearly basis, like this is the world we live in.
Yeah, you hear it all. It's like that old joke that we used to have, Paul, about PCI was that the traffic has to run through a firewall. So how many times did we have someone that would take an old firewall and drill a hole through it and then put the cable through that hole, and then all the traffic runs through a firewall? I mean, it meets the letter of the law.
Wow.
Doesn't mean it's secure.
No.
Tyler, sorry.
I was going to say something like, well, you have to do segmentation. PCI requires it.
Yeah, but that's still, up for interpretation. Sorry, Tyler, go ahead.
Hint, it doesn't.
From a technical aspect, can you kind of explain how, like, are we talking about an agent here? How are the logs and detections happening? How's the honeypot being interacted with? And then, what's the process or technical aspects that the product's bringing? What would you have to set up and install to make that work?
Yeah. So I think I talked a lot about Duo initially, but shifting to the detection side, I'll talk a little bit about Blue Mira. So first off, bluemira.com/integrations, we're going to have a detection page where you can go to test your SIM. A few different examples, like Bo Bollock's tool for password spraying. We'll have an Office 365 one up here. But like these are good examples of, hey, very simple and easy. Anybody can go test, and these are free. So we're a big fan of providing lots of free advice and free tools. But yeah, from a Blue Mira perspective, right, essentially we have a sensor that goes within a customer's environment, and I'll hop in the actual product itself to show to some of this. And the whole intention there is to get a few different things. One, act as a honeypot, and in that instance, we're using Open Canary. If you're not familiar with Haroon, with Thinks, right? It's a great product. I just love endorsing good products, right? But another good example of like a Saasified product that deploys so quickly, right? On the Blue Mira side, right, essentially I can add modules and I can come in here and, hey, let's pick Duo, for example, put in some API keys, Umbrella. Oh man, I'm talking about too much from Cisco today, I guess. Pick whatever you need, whether it's Azure Event Hub, all your Office 365, right? Hit install, and then also, the ability to get lateral movement detection via honeypot. So a sensor here, which I hit install, and basically you're operational and you're ingesting and starting to get to detection pretty quickly. So yeah, most organizations, segmentation's a great thing. I would say that not all organizations have segmentation, right? So you can put multiple sensors within your environment to detect from a lateral movement perspective. But combination of that and being able to do detections based on logging is where our value is. And when we're talking about getting up and running, all that stuff's predefined, so it just gets in and works from a service perspective. And then I can hop into some of the detections. And let me know if that.
Sorry, Patrick. Jeff, I actually think that's a valid question you posed in the Discord channel. So, Patrick, what?
So it wasn't just me. We did get a little bit ahead.
Yeah, we got ahead of ourselves. You're absolutely correct,
Okay.
Jeff. So, for Blue Mira, what is the problem you're trying to solve?
Yeah, no, that's great. And sorry, I might have hopped too far ahead. The major aspect is doing effective detection, right, via things like logging and SIM. Traditionally have been super complicated, requires high level of skill and resource. And so for organizations that don't have deep skills, deep resources, and typically for organizations in the area of 200 to 5,000 employees, being able to get the tools in place to do detection, to detect real threats, right, and surface them, and then be able to respond without having deep security skills, if that's helpful.
Yeah, and Patrick, there's obviously a lot of solutions like this in the market today. Many of them have a free offering. I'm assuming you also have a free offerings from Blue Mira as well.
Yeah, we so right now we deploy for customers for free to test. We're not quite to complete freemium offering yet, where you can start at no cost, but we literally let any customer roll our product out, and then we usually figure out costing and terms with them, right? And timeline on that, if that's helpful.
Yeah.
So free trial. Our goal is that, later this year, early next, we will have full freemium for some of the API driven services that we integrate with. So similar to Duo, where you could plug in two-factor, you can plug in Blue Mira as well.
Gotcha.
God bless you for switching to two-factor.
Tyler, did you have more questions? Sorry. I don't know if you got your questions.
No, so I was also curious, like from the agent standpoint and from people that already have setups or deployments or maybe multi-segmentation where they already have things like Sysmon or Beats. Does this ingest additional info and or currently configured logs and outputs?
Yeah, so a few different things. First off, we suggest all our customers install Sysmon. It's great. We ingest that. We leverage NX log for log collection via Windows to get those logs from a server-side perspective. And then there's on the Windows log, we also have, and this is free for anybody that has, everyone has Windows, right? But if you're looking to get better logging, we have a free GPO template called Log Mira you can get off GitHub, but that gives you more verbose logging for better detection as well. And so, like, if you think about it, like fundamentally, like your Windows logs aren't even optimized to do detection. So if you're trying to deploy a SIM and you don't even take basic steps like that and get Sysmon in place, you're not going to get the best level of detection, right? Possible, which a lot of common threats are identified by. So,
so I see. So I can get log Mira, and it gives me a template to be able to log my PowerShell and command line activity in Windows, and then that makes it generate those logs. I can ingest that with whatever solution I have or want to acquire. Correct?
Yep. Yeah, that's correct. And so, like, ensuring and making sure that customers have good hygiene even coming on ensures you can do more effective detection. So even if you're not using Blue Mira and you're using a different product for SIM, it's always the best practice to implement these things. And so, like, if you don't implement those things from the get-go, you're pretty much going to lose out. And most people don't know that they need to do these things, right? So we're essentially helping them along the process to ensure they do it. That takes about 5 minutes, right? To get a GPO template applied across your Windows environment, if that's helpful.
I talked about this earlier this week. I'm seeing very much a shift, and I don't want to say it's happening, like it's basically already happened, right? We've gone from collect everything and put it in my gigantic SIM to a bunch of these like point solutions that spun up companies that were like, well, you need EUBA and you need this, logging thing, and you need this point solution, to solutions such as Blue Mira and many others that are like, well, really what you need is not to log everything and not to have like a million different point solutions, but you need to be collecting this data from these various services, systems, network, in these various points, and then being able to correlate it together, right? Is that kind of where you see the market going as well, and what you're trying to provide a solution for at Blue Mira?
Yeah, absolutely. First off, getting any organization to baseline detection is the first, need for most companies and organizations, right? I mean, I look at pen tests nonstop, and most of them are red. They can't even detect password spraying or PowerShell bypass. So, I mean, certainly that, the extent is they're not going to detect a ransomware attack that starts with a remote connection via RDP or password spraying or another type of exploit, right? So it's basically, hey, how do you detect reconnaissance scanning? How do you take all these different steps? And I can show from a product perspective what that looks like as well. But just getting those base level controls, like UEBA is a pipe dream for most of them. Now we do have UAB capabilities in our product to some extent to do detection with users and devices, for instance. But
and Patrick, I think that's the struggle today, is that many of these things now are features. As an end user trying to protect an enterprise or small enterprise, how do I know which one of these things I need to enable to correlate together to collect that baseline, which I still think we haven't really standardized on a baseline of what needs to be collected. How specific is that? Or it sounds like you have this kind of like baseline of here's where you need to collect the stuff from, here's how you need to correlate it to protect against majority of attacks, right?
Yeah, absolutely, right. And I think it's ensuring that there's some controls in place as well that are important. But if you look at it, it's like firewall, endpoint, identity stack, productivity stack, your hosts, cloud infrastructure. I need to update my slide a little bit more there, but it's like, hey, if you cover those bases, there are other areas you can cover, but the other risk you have is noise. And I think a good example of that is like, you can also capture network logs, but the second you start going there, the increase of noise ratio to actual threat identification is going to shift and change, right? So I think that's, today we don't go there from a product perspective, and likely that's more or less integrating with other products that do that really well.
Sure.
Is the best approach, right? Opposed to, hey, let's try and carve off network logging in addition to these different areas. But certainly Windows, your firewall, your EDR technology, and then identity, right? Which ties back to Windows and/or Azure, Okta, or Duo, are going to be your key places. And then your productivity suites with email like Office 365 and G Suite.
Yes. Tyler, did you have more questions? I'm joking. Jeff is like wildly raising his hand.
Yeah, Jeff, we see you over there. Jeff. We're just not being rude and interrupting our guest.
Between the lines.
No, you can interrupt me.
Well, no, I just had a thought, and I want to hear Patrick's take on it first, but it's really a question for anybody. And I'm asking myself the same question, because you had said something a little while ago, Patrick, about, they don't even detect this, that, or the other. And it occurred to me, have we ever talked lately, Paul, Larry, to an IDS or an IPS product vendor? Whatever happened to IDS, IPS?
Oh, well, IDS is dead.
For Patrick. It's dead.
No.
I mean, it doesn't exist.
From a detection perspective, right? Like, if you're talking about like firepower, right, on a Cisco device or a Palo Alto, right, like built into the firewall, it's useful. On the network edge is where I would say there's some value there. But outside of that, I think it's a good question. Where else you're going to find value?
Well, I think there's been a shift, Jeff, to your question, right, from attacks that are either attacking the network stacks directly or very easily detectable in attacking network services. We've seen that shift to the client side, and then very much shift to much more advanced things happening on the client side. That's not to say I don't believe the network is not important. It is the source of actual truth. But to be effective in your security program, you need to take data from other sources and correlate that together. So the network is still there. I think it's not. We used to be able to, I think, be a lot more effective with our network-based intrusion detection systems that were largely network-based. Right? So we had host-based, we had network-based intrusion detection systems. If we talk about just the network aspect of that, attacks back in the day were very much buffer overflow, network, remote code execution. We see a lot less of those today, and a lot more focus on phishing, social engineering the client, the user, and getting onto the client system, and then the lateral movement that happens from there. Network is still a component to that, but now you have a lot more places, number one, that you need to look at, and also technology that I think has advanced very much, like greatly, to be able to detect those things. And I think while it's a buzzword, a whole bunch of buzzwords in AI and machine learning, I think we're much more effectively applying machine learning to this data problem that's incorporating these technologies and not just relying on network detections.
Well, I guess.
Who's on the network? I mean, as we moved to COVID age, it's like,
right.
Well, everyone's accessing SaaS apps, right?
The network is the
other
internet.
Than your IT team.
Well, I think I was trying to ask somewhat of a philosophical question, and it's PCI related because PCI requires IDS or IPS at strategic places, and all of a sudden it occurred to me, I can't remember the last time we've talked about an IDS product. So it's clearly been absorbed into something else. But the way in the early days I used to distinguish an IDS product between things like a SIM product, things like was just collecting logs and looking to respond to alerts or whatever, was that there was an active response, an active block, which I think happens more often today in the things that we used to call firewalls, but are now large network appliances that do all the things that different products used to do. Am I off here?
No, Jeff, and I think that the volume of network traffic has increased such that there is so much noise. We have to correlate it to something else, especially if we're going to take an action, let alone an automated action based on an event.
Right.
Yep.
Well, and I think too, to Patrick's point, is the nature of attacks these days are not what they used to be, and it does certainly require, the term intrusion detection. I mean, who has to get on a box and pop a shell anymore? You can launch all sorts of automated attacks. You can launch ransomware. You launch a phishing attack that does all sorts of things. The things that need to be detected today are a lot different than the things that needed to be detected 10, 15, 20 years ago, maybe even 5 years ago.
Yeah, and I think, to show some examples too, it's like, let's say password spraying, right? Well, if you're at least detecting on this, even if you have two-factor, at least you're going to, catch it in the act. Even if you have two-factor though, like password spraying can still compromise the first part of the credential. And now basically you're halfway there. Go try and run an attack to try and pop the second half. That's hard. That's not easy. Two-factor is extremely effective, right? But like you would want to know these things are going on so you can reestablish that trust, or stop them even earlier. So like password spraying, reconnaissance scanning on a firewall. Here's an instance where like, hey, we're able to detect it via different threat feeds and also the frequency of the passwords being tested, and click a button and block on the firewall, for instance. Or we can actually, in this instance, automate so that it doesn't even require a person and deploy Blue Arrow threat feeds on the firewall itself. So the concept or idea here is that you're automating a lot of these actions where you're not even looking at the logs. It's just taking on the work itself to block and stop common types of detections across the customer's infrastructure. To hop through an example there, and I can share some other types of threats or examples, but like those are going to be common early in the attack life cycle with ransomware, for instance, right? Another common one, I'd say, like large amount of customers we deploy POCs. Hey, public IP address connecting to an internal network via RDP or SMB. It's shocking how many times we deploy and this pops up all over the place, right? Just basic common misconfiguration is a good example of the type of risk there, if that's helpful to understand from a product perspective and from a customer environment perspective.
I think we've had to get smarter about how we analyze the data and how we take actions, right? Because the volume has increased, the attack surface has completely changed, attacker behavior has changed. I think we've very rightfully so, moved from, hey, I saw someone trying to, log into an FTP site, to being able to correlate that data between, this was a public IP address that was trying to contact this account, and by the way, it had this vulnerability, and by the way, we saw this other event happen after that. Like, it's correlating those events between each other. I still think it's very difficult, but I think we've gotten much better at versus, Jeff, back to your point of network intrusion detection systems, where that we're like, hey, I saw this exploit attempt, come across. I think today we'd be like, yeah, whatever, right? Now it's more about applying context to those, to prioritize those events.
To that point, Paul, I'm curious. So from the usability standpoint and the ease of kind of interface, it looks like it's very adoptable by a SOC or a small security team of just about any size from a small standpoint. From a very granular or scalability at a large enterprise and maybe a much more mature security team or security program, does that still have the ability to kind of get a little bit more granular with actions and smart correlations into other systems?
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, our core bread and butter right now is the small to medium size. I kind of mentioned 5 to 2,500, 500 to 5,000 is our sweet spot. And I got to be honest, like, I get on calls with companies with 5,000 employees that have 1 or 2 people in security. Mm-hmm. It is the world we live in. That's a reality.
They're doing well.
And they're trying to figure out, it's like, I don't even know how to get my hands on this stuff. I don't even know what problems are within my environment, right? So being able to surface real risk to them is a big piece there. I do think in the enterprise today, if you look at our product, we fit very well side by side with some of these other products because there's so much noise being kicked off from a lot of them that it's hard to figure out what things really matter. And really, as a product perspective, what we're focused on is, hey, what things should you really care about? So, like, here's a good example is Cisco Umbrella. Cisco Umbrella is going to kick off a ton of alerts every time someone clicks on a link or does something. You shouldn't, like, it blocks it, right? You shouldn't worry about it, but you should worry about command and control, or you should worry about, for instance, someone persistently clicking on the same link. That sort of behavior is the type of thing that will surface, right? And you can go to Umbrella and see all the other alerts if you really want to, but we're going to alert you on the things that really matter. So it's helping really point the people in the right direction as far as what things really to prioritize and spend the time on. And so I think in the enterprise side, I think as we build, similar to Duo, when we built Duo, you start on the small side, you really figure out and you deliver on delivering this value niche, if that makes sense for the size customer and their needs. And then you kind of scale the enterprise capabilities out. We're already getting pulled up market from a company perspective into these larger companies because they can't deal with, even with 5 or 10 people, all the noise that's coming out of their existing products. I mean, I have friends that literally have 2 to 3 people full time that literally just respond to false positives all day long. That's not an effective use of resources, right? But I think that's a reality where most of the enterprise SOCs actually are. So I think there's an aspect of, like, I think sliding and complementary in an enterprise is a good approach. And then as we continue to build out feature sets and functionality for enterprise, right? Essentially, I don't think it'll be long before we're there as well.
So if I can summarize what I'm hearing, at least the grand plan is, I was chatting with InfoSister, and shout out to InfoSister on the Discord server.
Hey, Amanda.
The original problems that I used to see with SIMs was going into companies, and yes, this is PCI assessments, finding companies that had successfully deployed their SIM product was rare, and that was a huge problem. But then the flip side is once you get it deployed, you turn it on, and there's even back in those days there was a lot of noise coming in. Granted, it's a much worse problem today. It's knowing what to do, with all the information, knowing when to respond, knowing how to respond. So what I hear you saying is, you're trying to weed through all that and find the things the companies should care about, and I'm assuming that means it's actually an indicator of an active type of bad thing happening, whether it's an attack or whatever. But it still seems like there's room for growth or maturity in terms of well, let me rephrase that. There's more, and this was something that was bugging me from our first segment tonight. There's more to worry about in a network and an enterprise than strictly what it is you're finding. There's other factors, there's other things that organizations, enterprises should care about than strictly, this is clearly an attack that can be tied to a ransomware, or it can be tied to this, that, or the other. There's other bad things that goes on. What immediately jumps out is like, insider threat in terms of somebody's gone rogue, somebody's doing something that they shouldn't be doing. Are you guys thinking about tackling that to some degree, but only if the bad guys are doing things that are seen easily?
A good example there, I think, is like, most customers, I would say, in the small to mid market, right, don't have a honeypot. So having a honeypot even on our sensor detects some aspect of maybe someone's trying to do something malicious laterally, right? So there's an aspect of like, getting some basic level controls in all these different areas, and we leverage and use kind of making sure we have coverage across MITRE attack framework, not every single detail, because that's just going to create a ton of noise. As well, I think there's a balance as you look at MITRE and how deep it gets. Right. It is a really good framework to leverage and use, but essentially getting the right basic controls based on what technology stack the customer has, and being plug and play essentially then it gets you to that place of value. So as we're thinking about it continued, first off, like we just expanded in cloud infrastructure with Microsoft products, Azure, ATP, all those different things, right? Moving over to instance AWS and GCP to tackle those platforms as well. But all these different tools have tons of different information that are great. It's a matter of correlating and then centralizing the things that actually matter based on what you can detect. And it's funny, InfoSisters on the chat. We're taking the time to build the detections based on what integration stack the customer has. So those get surfaced and prioritized to the customer. But there is a lot more we're thinking about too, of like incorporating your vuln scanning tool into here so that you can see from a device perspective more information, getting more granular. I'm not diving into like deep dive into reporting and all that sort of stuff, right? But there is a lot of low hanging fruit to tackle to continue to build out the value from a product perspective.
So, quick question around the honeypots and kind of what you guys are doing there. Does this have the ability to customize or make different honeypots, or is it a specific set of honeypots that you guys have built and are expanding upon? Like, is that a customer customized portal, or is that something you guys do?
No, today we're just using basic Open Canary, right? There's a aspect, and we talked to Haroon, like you can point at Haroon Canary. If you really want more sophisticated canaries, you should go buy Canary. What I'm talking about here is most people don't have a honeypot, and they're not just going to go buy a honeypot on their own either. Some will, like people should, right? That's a good way to do detection, but no, for us, it's basic capabilities of what you would get with an Open Canary, and you can spin as many as you want up, right, with our product to get that some aspect of lateral movement detection, and that's what we're talking about is like getting a baseline detection place. Yep.
I want to call you out on that real quick, Patrick. The organization of 5,000 people that has 2 security guys, what's their priority on installing a honeypot?
Oh, it's not even on their list, right?
Right.
It's not. So being able to literally they have to deploy a SIM. They need to get some centralized detection, be able to click a button and have a honeypot up and running as well. That's high value to them, even if it's not the most sophisticated, right?
It's usually a low false positive, and typically if it's a good honeypot, that is one of the few visibility points that they may have before a full compromise happens.
Correct.
That's why I was asking kind of on the customization, like things like Kerber roasting, where you're able to put those kind of honey tokens with inside of Active Directory, or different user accounts that maybe shouldn't get hit. An empty domain admins that has, a honey token in it. Like, those are the kind of things I was trying to figure out. Does that allow you to put those kind of pieces into play?
No, and actually, it's kind of funny on the customization side. Like, we will get to where you can start doing some of your own things, like building your own rule sets. But in the product today, the only customization is going to be around really reporting. Everything else is like, we plug into the integration stack. It's our detections. We might make a modification, right, based on customer environment and talking about need, or like we do essentially pre-tuning when we deploy the rules so that there's not a ton of noise. For things that can be identified up front. But that's a huge part of the value, is like we take essentially that whole stack off the plate from a customer perspective. And because the integrations are pre-built end to end, we can plug and play really, really fast and get time to security down to a couple of hours or less, right? And that's what we're talking about value-wise, is like, oh no, we did get an operational SIM with many different high value detections in place for a customer, when most SIMs don't ever get deployed effectively to getting detection response, right? So that's where we're at from an organization perspective, and where we provide tons of value.
I will say though, honeypots can be very low false positive, but they're also a very low alert rate as well, right?
Yep.
If deployed correctly, you may get 3 alerts from your canary per year. And you may wonder most of the time, like, is it working? Like, is it doing anything? But even if, let's say, 2 out of those 3 are false positives and you have to respond to them, there's a sharp contrast, Patrick, your description of it and others of a SIM, right, which is throwing alerts at you all day long. So if you get 3, 2 are false positive, but that one, as Tyler pointed out, is your really only window into an attack that's happening, your honeypot is worth all the money that you paid for it and probably more, right?
Yep. Hey, and you can go test your honeypot.
Yeah, but that's a good point. You should test it. You should absolutely test it as well, right? Make sure it's working. I think I've asked that of other vendors as well. Like, every once in a while, do you have some like automated thing to know that it's like still running, right?
Go test. Make sure you shut. I need to add another rule here, but like, create a domain administrator. See if you do detection on that. Most organizations don't. Go test your password spraying. And this is by Bo Bullock, right? From a tool perspective, Daft Hack on GitHub. I mean, these are basic tests you can run to see if you have any detection capabilities today. And I will tell you, 9 out of 10 organizations will not be able to detect these basic things.
Patrick, we just have 5 questions left for you. These are 5 questions we asked of all of our guests that are coming on the show for the first time. So you ready to play 5 questions with Security Weekly?
Let's do it.
3 words to describe yourself.
Crazy, energetic, fun. Huh?
If you were a serial killer, what would be your weapon of choice?
Oh gosh, I'm not really the killer type.
If you were,
pop can.
There you go. Patrick, if you wrote a book about yourself, what would the title be?
Oh, wow. Like Lost in Distraction.
In the popular game of Ask Grabby Grabby, do you prefer to go first or second?
Second.
Choose 2 celebrities to be your parents.
Alive, dead, fictional, or otherwise.
Larry, you were late
on
that.
Oh, man. 2 celebrities? I'm not good with celebrities.
Amanda counts.
I was actually thinking about Woody Woodpecker.
My
can
kids
it be
love
cartoon?
It can be cartoon, male, female.
I would say probably Woody Woodpecker, and then gosh, I don't know who was the other parent. I don't know. Little Mira.
The little Mira.
Right.
Wow.
Very nice. Very nice.
Oh my God.
Patrick, thank you so much for appearing on Paul's Security Weekly.
Hey,
Yeah,
before we
thanks so
let
much.
Patrick go, can we see him do something with that ramp behind him?
Oh my gosh.
I don't know.
No,
if there's-
no pressure. No
I have a
pressure.
skateboard here.
Don't hurt yourself.
Oh my gosh, this is my kid's skateboard, so I'm gonna give it a try.
Oh look! Oh, you got two
Sure
ramps set
it
up
is.
there. I didn't see the other
Oh yeah,
one.
it's kind of a half pipe, and this is a kid's board, so.
Wow. Oh, don't fall. Very nice, Patrick. Round of applause for Patrick.
Thanks for having me on today.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Patrick.
Hey, thanks, Patrick.
With that, we'll take a short break. Come back with the security news for this week. Stay tuned.